All right, next question's from Neil. I've always been fascinated with the history of the Black Death.
Oh.
What were the consequences of it regarding the faith? If something like it were to happen again, do you think the faith would survive in its current state? Also, any books you could recommend would be greatly appreciated.
Well, a couple of things to say. Firstly, one of my long-standing jokes has been that I want to form the most uh, egalitarian hereditary society ever.
Egalitarian hereditary society.
Well, yeah, well, hereditary societies are generally sort of aristocratic.
Yeah.
The Daughters of the American Revolution, the Holland Society. I mean, there are people who descend from very particular groups,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't descend, you can't be a member. And sometimes you've got to be the oldest son or the oldest daughter of a particular individual who was in the revolution or whatever.
Okay.
So that's very most hereditary societies in the United States are like that. But this would be called the hereditary order of the sons and daughters of the Black Plague. And you would have to prove that you descend from a survivor.
Why would you do that?
Why would you do that? Well, so you could join the organization and you could belong to it. But the question is, how could you prove that you were a member, that your ancestors survived? Because you're here.
Yeah, I don't understand. I don't get it. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a joke. I mean, obviously, if you're of European descent at all,
Yeah.
you descend from a survivor of the Black Plague.
Oh, you know what? I descended from someone who didn't make it.
Yeah, all of my ancestors died in the
Yeah.
plague.
Yeah.
No children left.
Nope.
They all died. It's hereditary in my family to have no children. For generations, we've been barren. There we've been decade after decade without a child. It's so terrible. So yeah, all my ancestors were wiped out in the Black Plague. No one survived to bear children.
What a sad story.
Isn't it? But the plague was really horrific. It swept away, depending on where you were, 1 to 2/3, at least, of the people in the area. So this was a terrible, terrible thing. The effect it had on the church was big and long-lasting. It's responsible for the coming of low masses. Because, we used to be like the Eastern Church, where, you had to have somebody doing music, somebody chanting.
Yeah.
But the deaths of so many choirs and so many choir masters brought in the low mass. It also, to a great degree, ended whatever was left of communion in both kinds for the laity. And it also changed iconography in Europe. Because prior to the Black Death, you see the statues of the Virgin and Child throughout Europe, they're all smiling and happy.
Wow.
But the Black Death hits, and they all look very sad and woebegone. And the whole style of religious artwork changes. You have these dances of death, and these skeletons on their way to heaven or hell. I mean,
Wow.
it completely changed people's outlook. Well, I mean, stop and think about it. If let's say you're
No,
living,
of course. I mean, of course. But I don't think people historically ever. Most people haven't made that connection.
No, but where it hit me? I was at the cloisters in New York on this trip. I don't want to boast or anything, but I went both to the Met and to the cloisters, and also the Merchant House Museum in Greenwich Village. Not that I'm boasting, but the cloisters is an extraordinary place because it was put together by Rockefeller. About bits and pieces of monasteries and castles and so forth all over Europe, and transported and built into this greater whole in northern Manhattan. And it's an astonishing place. The Met is beautiful, but it's a museum, and everything is on exhibit.
Yeah.
But at the cloisters, they try to give a feel for what these things would have been like, except that they're from all over. It's very eclectic. So you have a Spanish altar with a Dutch altarpiece. These things would never have been together. My joke is that the cloisters are kind of like the Catholic Church in America, made up of bits and pieces from all over Europe.
Right. Yeah.
But at any rate, it's beautiful. The effect is tremendous. I mention it because that was one of the things that hit me very hard. Every time I looked at a smiling statue, I knew it predated the Black Plague, and I looked, and sure enough, and when I'd see them looking scowling and woebegone, it came from after. Now, As to how this would affect the church today, well, imagine, if you will, that the Tumbler House Tower and the neighborhood around it lost 2/3 of the people here. And, every day somebody else, some other bunch of people dies. And this goes on for weeks, maybe months. And once the angel of death passes, you'll have to pick up the pieces, but there are a lot fewer people. And think, too, how dependent we are mentally today on our technology. It's the difference between our ancestors and ourselves is that they didn't expect something like the plague, but they were very used to the fact that we all live on God's generosity.
Yeah.
Because they were used to things like famine.
Tuberculosis.
Yep. Diseases that popped out of nowhere. There's no antibiotics,
Yeah.
so a cold could kill you. Influenza, life you could lose. They had never lost it in such an industrial strength way.
Yeah.
But they knew that they were dependent upon God from moment to moment to survive. Well, with us, we're dependent upon science. If you get sick, you go to somebody. If you're endangered, you call the cops.
Yeah.
There's someone to take care of everything for you. If that broke down, oh, Nelly, and that fear is very deep in us. That's why the whole zombie genre is so big. Because the prospect of something coming up that all of our science and all of our government are unable to deal with. What is one of the most standard items in horror and science fiction movies? It's a newscast that's literally interrupted by whatever's going on.
Yeah.
That is the height of fear for us. Because if there's an earthquake, what do? You turn on the news. If there's any kind of a disaster, you turn on the news. That's normality for us. That's the voice of sanity and safety. As long as the news is functioning, then there's safety somewhere. And the reason why smart filmmakers have all these scenes of the news people being attacked and the screen going black is because that's our ultimate nightmare. The machine stops. We're afraid of that. We're very much afraid. We don't talk about it. We don't look at it. We don't examine it. But we have these other things that sort of, allow us to deal with those fears. Well, this is actually not just rambling. I'm getting to your question. If we had a plague like that break out now, say Ebola became easily passed on.
Yeah.
Or this coronavirus everyone's getting excited about.
Yeah.
If it got to the point to where you lost 2/3 of people in every locality, the church would actually benefit in a way, in the sense that people would doubtless focus their thoughts a great deal, because everything that they're dependent upon unconsciously would be shown up. But it would be very, very difficult. We'd lose a lot of clerics. A lot of them would die, because that always happens. When there's a plague. I remember in the Cathedral of Savannah, Georgia, there's a monument, I think, to 3 priests who were on a French ship that docked in Savannah during a yellow fever epidemic in the 1840s, whatever it was. Well, they weren't assigned to Savannah. They were on their way somewhere else, New York or somewhere. But the ranks of priests in Savannah had been absolutely devastated, and they needed people to attend to the dying. So these 3 priests got off the boat, which they went ashore. Nobody wanted anywhere near Savannah at that moment, and they presented themselves to the bishop or the chancellor who was still running the show, and they said, "We're here to work," and he did. And the 3 of them, they all 3 worked with the dying until they died themselves. That was the kind of heroism one got out of priests. And that would come out again. Don't kid yourself at all. You might have some who'd run away and all that, but in that kind of life and death situation, it brings out the best and the worst in people. So I guarantee you would find hero priests again and hero nuns, because we see them now in different places where this stuff happens. And there would be people who stuck by their posts, not just priests, but I mean all sorts of people, even though it wasn't smart, and a lot of them would die. And then you'd have other people who would flee. But it would be a terrible mess, and I can't say that I would be surprised if such a thing lies in our future.
Really?
Yeah. Well, see, part of the problem is that the world is so global today. People forget that a great deal of what kept various contagion contained is that people didn't travel much.
Yeah.
But if you remember, for instance, Planet of the Apes, at the end of the first movie, not the original series that I saw, but the new one, you see this virus that kills almost everybody. Not everybody, but almost everybody. And you see how it follows the planes. It gets given to an airline pilot. And then he gets on the plane. And then you see the map.
Yeah.
Well, something like that is far from beyond the realm of possibility. Now, whether or not it will happen, who knows? I don't. But we have to presume that what has happened can happen. The other thing I should point out is that as far as the plague itself goes, because all of our ancestors had it and survived, we have a certain resistance to it, we being your European descendants, which is why even though all of our squirrels here have the plague, we don't get it.
Okay.
Otherwise, we would.
Yeah.
We don't. But interestingly enough, the resistance of American Indians to it and African blacks is much less because their ancestors didn't have it. And in 1924, there was an outbreak of the plague here in Los Angeles on Clara Street. And it was almost all Mexicans who got it. Again, because they were more Indian. These people were more Indian than they were Spanish. And their ancestors had never had it, and they had no resistance to it. So there was a number of people died in that outbreak in 1924.
So they had a cure for the plague.
Oh yeah, they were able to treat it.
Yeah.
And we do have that, and we also have all sorts of inoculations against the plague.
Yeah.
And it's almost standard now.
Yeah.
So we have all kinds of reasons why that particular plague is not at the moment a threat.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they're warning us about,
it jumping from the rats to the human population because of the homeless. So the plague is making a comeback because of the homeless crisis.
as is typhus.
Right. Yeah.
And
Typhus.
doubtless, Mayor Garcetti and the City Council of Los Angeles, in between changing the name of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, and all that important stuff.
Well, I read their solution to this, and so they're going to mandate that the cities do stuff, and it seems like the solution is to offer more housing. But to me, to my layman, mind, the crisis is happening because of lenient mental health laws.
Yeah.
So people, they're not going to want to go in houses.
No. And the thing
And you can't make them.
Well, out of the current laws. And the thing is, you got to bear in mind that the California's current homeless situation actually began under President Reagan. Because we had Governor Reagan.
Yeah.
We had a very extensive system of state madhouses, one of which was in Camarillo, which was north of the seminary. And so the joke was they'd call it the North Campus of the seminary. They'd also say the graduates of the two institutions were indistinguishable. But at any rate, Governor Reagan decided that, it would be great to save money by closing these joints. Well, it wasn't a smart idea. In the end, it's cost the state a lot more than keeping them open would have done. And of course, you see this all over the country. The system of state madhouses is closed.
Yeah.
Now, just about the only thing you do that they're good for is being used by ghost hunters television programs.
Right.
Well, you know how it goes. Yes, we'll be exploring the horrible old moron state asylum
Yeah.
where the state kept these people. Well, these places were not nice, a lot of them, and they were badly run, a lot of them.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, they kept their inmates off the streets and housed.
Right.
Now, is that preferable? Some of them were just abysmal, absolutely. But the alternative, is that better?
You know, I drive up and down Mayflower to go to work each day, and every single day there's a guy with a giant, like, cleaning bin with all his stuff walking up and down the street almost every single day now. I'd never seen that before. On Mayflower, right by your house.
But see, he's only one.
Yeah.
Now, when I am in town, I mean, it's much bigger than the last time I was here.
Yeah.
They have anytime there's an underpass on the freeway, there's a village of tents.
Yeah.
And, I'll see people walking down the street. I think to myself, not homeless,
Yeah.
I mean, somebody going from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Well, typhus, plague.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
By the way, American Heritage. I can't give you a book on the plague. There have been several. I can't think of any. But American Heritage, the magazine of American history, which you can access online, had a wonderful article about the plague in general, and specifically its outbreak in Los Angeles. It was called Black Plague on Clara Street. So look it up, read it, and you'll find interesting factoids about the plague, including the fact that from the time it ran rampant in Europe in the 1300s until the 19th century, the only place in the world, apparently, where it lived was in the fleas of Tibetan marmosets. So the land of the Dalai Lama was the last refuge for a long time of the Black Plague.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.